Listen up, fellow Democrats. Fight fake news and lies with facts. Save our democracy from right-wing hypocrisy. Keep our integrity, embrace our diversity. Whenever we're down, we always come back. So listen up, Democrats.
Hello, everyone. This is Larry Taylor, and this is the show entitled Progressive Oregon. So welcome. Today on our agenda, we have several topics. The first one will be our efforts to restore democracy to the Democratic Party of Oregon. We're going to talk about the requests that have been made to the Democratic Party regarding aerial spraying and what's happening in Rockaway Beach. And then we'll go to a completely different topic. And this will be the first of several segments devoted to using the rule of law and parliamentary procedure to stand up for your rights. And then we'll briefly talk about events happening in politics this week and topics for our upcoming shows. So we'll go to our first slide. The Democratic Party of Oregon has historically been run kind of as a priesthood, separate from the public, but in reality, the Democratic Party belongs to all the registered Democrats in the state. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is close that gap. So the beliefs of the party reflect the beliefs of the people who belong to the party. So one of the things that happens is every quarter, delegates from across the state get together and do the business of the party. And in this last weekend, we met in Tillamook, Oregon. Just to mention some other opportunities, we have the platform convention coming up in March of 2018. Any registered Democrat can participate in that, and that's how we get consensus amongst all of the Democrats on what the values are of our party, and from that we craft our platform and our legislative agenda. So we met last Sunday. Excuse me. Let's show the first slide. It's for those of us who like sort of New England style politics. This is very much in that vein. The delegates meet in a room. There's no way to drop in and participate electronically. So we have people coming from Wallowa County, and we have people coming from Klamath County and from Curry County, and then of course from Central Oregon and from the metro area. And this time we met in Tillamook. Sitting at the front of the room are the officers of the party, and then those are the delegates sitting behind them. So when we did our first broadcast several weeks ago, I guess a little longer than that, that was from the previous the second quarter meeting, and we had just approved some bylaws changes that would restore democracy in various aspects to the bylaws of the Democratic Party. And we got it so that they would be mentioned that afternoon so that we could consider them at this party, at the meeting this weekend. So there were three changes that we were after, and some of this seems a little bit dry, but they're actually very important in restoring the concept of democracy to how the party is run. When we go, I was previously a delegate to the Democratic National Convention. We would fly to Atlanta and to DC for these meetings, and we would go to meetings for several days, but there would never be any action. They were meet and greets. And after 3 years of this, you really wonder what is my role as a delegate? Because if I'm not deciding anything and voting on anything, really what does my participation mean? And we found the same trend happening here in the Democratic Party of Oregon. Over the past 10 years, there's been a tendency to withdraw power from the delegates and centralize it with the leadership. And so we would go to these quarterly meetings, and people would spend several $100s for overnight stays, and these it takes a lot of time to do this stuff and travel, and there was no real results coming out of them. There was a general hatred of passing resolutions because the party had not designed a process for tying the resolutions that come before the group to the platform of the party. And so they, instead of improving that process, they just tried to squelch them. And that was one of the few things that that members could do when they go to these party meetings. So anyway, we had 3 bylaws changes proposed. The first one was to make the executive committee more functional and effective. Right now, we have an executive committee. They meet. It's lots of, oh, you guys are doing great, we love you, but no decisions being made. One of the problems with that group is that there is easily north of 100 members. And the reason why that number is so large is that the membership also includes all the members of the Democratic members of the Oregon legislature, all of the federal elected Democratic officials, and all of the statewide elected officials, such as Ellen Rosenblum and Governor Brown, and Labor Commissioner Brad Avakian and Treasurer Tobias Reed. They never come to the meetings. And so if it takes 50% plus 1 to call a meeting, it's impossible for the delegates to actually call a meeting. And so we're always at the call of the chair, regardless if there is any business to be conducted or not. And if you read in the bylaws, the purpose of the executive committee is to deal with the business of the party in between the state central committee meetings. It would be great if they would start utilizing the executive committee, because right now we have a nominating convention going on to replace a legislator who is resigning. And there were a number of arrangements that were made that have arose suspicions that there's favored candidates in the race, and the candidates are not being given a level playing field. And if the leadership of the Democratic Party of Oregon would just run these by the executive committee and get their feedback on them, just to make sure that everything is being considered and a level playing field is actually being provided, then people would not have these suspicions of the party. So ultimately, what we're trying to do is make the party run with uncompromising integrity. So,
hey Larry, I got a question for you, man.
Yeah.
And good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. We've got Davey Z and Mel and Melissa. How you doing? Andreas, Marcus, Lynn. I just got a question on that. It says more efficient. I mean, is there any thought to like not having to meet in person, like possibly doing this virtually, saving people time? Wouldn't that help?
It would. The challenge is there's 2 challenges. So voting, we want to make sure that only credentialed delegates vote, and there are probably technological ways of doing that. And the second one is, which is most important, is when we debate these issues, that everyone hears the debate and understands the data being presented before they vote, so that their vote is informed. And if you look at Robert's rules, they also recommend for electronic meetings that people are bidirectionally connected orally. And that means that they can hear what's going on and they can be heard, because delegates have rights to call for points of order and make motions on the floor. And if you're prevented from doing that, then your rights are being taken away in the meeting. And so unfortunately, until all those issues have been addressed so that everyone is treated equally in the meeting, we can't move to that model.
Well, let's show them that it can be done. We do it right here. Right? Anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
And for our group, the Progressive Caucus, we conduct statewide meetings all the time, and we take votes all the time. But also, our votes don't have quite the impact of the Democratic Party of Oregon, and so the bar for them is really high to make sure that the votes are accurate, because like one of the things that we voted on, we won by only 2 votes.
Yeah, good thing there's technology. We just got to introduce it to the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, and then without diverting to go down too far this path, we do have some technological challenges in the far reaches of the state.
Yes.
So Grant County is getting an incredible internet feed in the next couple of months. There's other counties like Malheur County, which is not so lucky. and we have to make sure everyone has equal access to it.
Agreed. Anyway, didn't mean to distract you too much. We're on to restore.
No, that we read about it all the time. So thank you for bringing it up. So the proposal was debated. We were broadsided on this one. The legislators had never come. They have never expressed interest in it. We were accused by the establishment of insulting the legislators by kicking them off this committee. Well, that was a complete mischaracterization of what we were doing, and we have multiple times said that we want to engage with the legislators, but in a way in which we discuss the platform and moving the beliefs of the Democratic Party forward. And we really need to fix that process. Having them sit on the executive committee is almost pointless. I mean, they have much better things to do than deal with the day-to-day operations of the Democratic Party. So it failed. We were successful on the second bylaws change. So at the meeting a year ago, they changed the bylaws, and it was presented as a housekeeping measure. And we were told that this was to make it easier to determine who was a delegate by saying that all of the delegates to the meetings, their term starts at the reorganization meeting in the first quarter of the year following the major election. It was late in the afternoon. Not a lot of notice had been given on this change, so people were not really aware that it was coming. It wasn't debated, and it was passed. Afterwards, we found out that what that really meant was that all of the newly elected delegates to the State Central Committee from across the state were prevented from voting for the 3 Democratic National Committee members that December, because their term of office would not begin until the following March. And that actually did affect the results, because there were some very tight races, and we expect that at least 2 of the 3 delegates would be different if all of the newly elected delegates had been able to vote. So fortunately, and it also created some anomalies, like Columbia County, which organizes this year in June, elected their new delegates. They would not be able to take office until 2019. So they've been elected now. They have to wait till March of 2019 before they can start serving. So fortunately, we won that one by 2 votes. But then we got to the third one, which was most disturbing. And this is where we see things that are discussed in the national media being reflected locally in really startling ways. So for the past 10 years, the appointments of committee chairs have been abused, and the current process for them is for them to be appointed by the chair of the Democratic Party of Oregon. They tend to appoint people who agree with them and will do their bidding and are accountable to them, when in fact all of these standing committees are accountable to the delegates of the State Central Committee. I mean, just like the chair is accountable to us, the vice chairs are accountable to us, the standing committees are also accountable to us. But by them having the leadership appointed by the chair, they feel accountable to them. We had one chair who didn't conduct a meeting for 18 months because the chair of the Democratic Party of Oregon didn't want them to meet.
That's ridiculous, man.
I know. Unfortunately, this got turned into a race issue, and we were completely broadsided by that. But we also see race, the progressive community being accused of racism at the national level too. And I'm still trying to find the connection to how that trickled down to what we were doing. But allegedly, the appointments for the current standing chairs were somehow based on gender and racial, as opposed to skill sets. And you could look at that set and say, yeah, I can see that. But you could also look at who got appointed and say that all of the members of the progressive movement were cut out, because there was nobody appointed that represented the followers of Bernie Sanders, who won the state in the primary last year by 56%. So we also encountered logical fallacies. one of the proponents of this change said, well, Thomas Jefferson documented the parliamentary procedures, and that's what the Senate had used when the country was founded. And one of the opponents of the change jumped up and said, how dare you mention Thomas Jefferson, a slave owner? And if you could go to the next page, you can see how this was also put into writing. So one of the appointed members of the Rules Committee said, I worry of relying too heavily on the words of Thomas Jefferson for reasons that I hope are obvious. In case they are not, his status as a slave owner and institutionally sanctioned rapist are a start. So I guess in their mind, this means that everything that Thomas Jefferson did, including the composition of the Declaration of Independence, is not valid.
I think we should ban reinforced concrete then.
Yes, and
the Nazis made that. You know that. The Nazis made reinforced concrete, so therefore, that's a great logical fallacy. It's unbelievable. What a redirect. How frustrating for you guys at this meeting.
Yeah. And so people who were on our side basically got thought shamed into voting against it, and so this one failed. What we really need to do is address the problem a solution that addresses the problem that they brought up, which is the fact that the Democratic Party of Oregon is overwhelmingly Caucasian, and we do not have good representation of the minority communities. And so we really need to do the hard work of reaching out to these communities and inviting them in and making them feel welcome and giving them the knowledge so they can be effective, instead of just throwing people into offices and checking off that bucket list item. So it'll be interesting to see where this one goes next.
It kind of like the points 1 and 3 fails prove themselves.
Yes.
Like they prove the reason they need to exist, because the people in power don't want them. So what do we have to do, Larry? I mean, what do we do to fix that? How do we change that?
We need more Democrats that are unencumbered by politics to join in the party and get involved in it. People assume that everything is being run well, and that they can go off and run their little lives, but there is a little slice of our lives that we have to devote to making sure that our democracy is healthy. And we know by all the energy that is being put into indivisible movements and was put into the Occupy movements, that people are passionate about this stuff. It's just that the Democratic Party has never opened its arms and really invited people to participate more broadly, and that's what we are doing in the Progressive Caucus. So that's the solution that I'm pursuing.
Well said. Thank you.
So as I was talking about earlier, one of the things that happens is that we pass resolutions. And you can hear the UN pass resolutions, and that they pass resolutions on the floor of the Congress, and we do the same thing. So in March of this year, March 26th, we passed a resolution 2017-001 to ban or regulate the aerial application of herbicides and pesticides on all public and private lands in the state of Oregon. And so what happened in the interim is that Rockaway Beach, where we were meeting, had been sprayed. And we have a guest on today. We have Nancy from Rockaway, who's going to give us some background into the aerial spraying issue and what they've been trying to do to get this stopped in the legislature. So.
Hi. Should I give a brief summary of how I got involved in this issue?
Yes.
Okay, in 2012, I live in Rockaway Beach, which is on the Oregon coast, North Oregon coast, and it's a small community, and I observed aerial spraying from our porch, and next stop, I observed logging, clear cutting from our porch, and subsequently hiking into that area with a friend that's a retired water quality expert, we learned that that's our watershed. It's 1,400 acres, very steep slopes, and is owned by two private industrial forest companies. So it's municipal water sourced within industrial forest. And it was the loggers that started talking to us and said, this is not good, this is your watershed, you have excellent water, but these practices are not good. And then they informed us that that the companies would be aerial spraying and that we should find out more and talk to Oregon Department of Forestry. And so that began like 5 years watching what's happening in our watershed, learning that this is happening up and down the Oregon coast, that most drinking waters in these small communities is surface water sourced within private watersheds. And then in 2013, from my porch, I could observe them. It's about a half mile as the crow flies from that clear-cut aerial spraying. And we could smell the chemicals in our neighborhood. I mean, who knows the potency? And then we learned that to be notified of these sprays, you have to submit a $25 to the Department of Forestry, and they will tell you a 6-month window that these sprays may be applied in the list of chemicals, and they're cocktails of chemicals that they're spraying. And so you could then learn that between maybe today and Christmas they might spray, and but there's no immediate notification, and you pay $25 for only a small section. It's not like, you know, from here to Rockaway. And then the other issue became that besides the spraying, it's the type of forestry. So 83% of our watershed was clear-cut between 2003 and 2013, which led to, you can observe slides, turbidity, and Rockaway with more turbidity in the water. And these had to update their plant, but these are still simple treatment plants compared to what you would find in metropolitan areas such as in Clackamas County. And so when you add more and more chlorine to deal with the mud coming off the slopes, you end up with byproducts, chlorine byproducts, which are trihalomethanes, which are a carcinogen. And Rockaway Beach during that period had more of those notices of above EPA standards than anywhere else on the North Coast. And so then in the meantime, we started meeting with like Oregon Department of Forestry, Department of Environmental Quality, and some glaring difficulties appeared. And one is that Oregon Department of Forestry does get notice from the private timber companies, but they are under no obligation to notify DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, that when the spray is happening so that they could do testing. So there's very little testing that happens related to sprays. We did privately and through then cooperation with DEQ find out a spray date, and there was testing, and one of the chemicals did show up in our water, though we do not know the amount. And then we started learning that this is not just Rockaway, but it's Oceanside, Netarts. All these communities have experienced or about to experience this type of clear cutting and aerial spraying in their watersheds.
Talk a little bit about the legislature and what you were trying to accomplish there.
So our group has worked with, when we first brought up this issue, major statewide environmental groups said that this is private forestry, this is really a difficult issue. And eventually Oregon Wild Beyond Toxics, many environmental organizations got involved, and in the last two legislative sessions, there were measures, bills introduced, and there were pretty conservative bills, one asking for more timely notification and also bigger buffers on the aerial spraying over our water, drinking water. And that most of these were really compromised measures, and like this year did not get out of committee. The previous legislative session, one bill got out with, now there was no buffers between municipalities and aerial spraying. And so 2 years ago, they've now established a 300-foot buffer. In Rockaway, municipal boundary, which is about 3 or 4 miles long, is bordered by industrial forests. And so in the past, they spray right up to those boundaries. And, there's schools on the other side, within the municipal boundaries, there's homes, and there was no warning or any buffer. And there has been studies such as Triangle Lake showing that these sprays, when aerially applied, can move 2 to 4 miles from spray site, and partially is affected by the winds. And here in Rockaway Beach, the winds really are a constant, mostly constantly happening. And then there's also revolatilization when you spray, and then the sun comes out, it re-vaporizes and can move also. And there's no air monitoring. And so we felt like we went to the legislature. We did talk with the governor's committee, her environmental advisors, and it has been really frustrating that, like this year in the legislature, there was no progress. The bills did not even get out of committee.
And which party controls the committee?
This was a Democratic House.
Yeah. So the platform of the Democratic Party is very pro-environment. And this is another case where, we've talked about how the national popular vote legislation failed in the Senate, and how the tenants' rights legislation failed in the Senate, even though those were widely supported by Democrats. And here we have a modest bill regarding a horrible situation where people are being sprayed by chemicals, bottled up in a committee controlled by Representative Witt. Is that correct?
Correct.
Who's a Democrat. And so, this is our continual frustration. We elect Democrats to the legislature. We have majorities in both houses. Why can't even the most basic pieces of legislation that Democrats want and is in alignment with the platform get passed?
Well, it was very frustrating in these hearings that there are individual Democratic legislators that are really good. David Gomberg of Newport was phenomenal. And then in Portland, Ann Leninger, and I can rattle through, but I think there are individual ones that are supportive. But at these hearings, there was Pacific Rivers had introduced trying to update the Forest Practices Act, and it was the Democrats had the majority, and that didn't get out of the committee. And these, again, were modest proposals. And also I want to comment that within the agencies, our public agencies like Oregon Department of Forestry and DEQ and Department of Agriculture, individual field workers have been very supportive and actually helped me learn the information about what happens out there in our woods. But at the then more management and administrative level at the state and actually local level, there's so much pressure by industry that these issues are not talked about. So I thank the field workers, but at a political level, there is so much pressure that it feels that not any progress is being made, or very little.
And do you know where the pressure is coming from?
We met last year with one of the agencies involved, Department DEQ, and there had been a source water assessment of coastal watersheds, a draft that was really good, and it was modest, but it was talking about that these forest practices are affecting our drinking water. Beyond just the quality of the water, it's the quantity. The watershed no longer can function as a watershed, like holding the water and then releasing it slowly. I mean, this stuff just runs off high in the winter, and then in the summer there's less quantity of water. And so this person stated in this meeting that it was pressure from the timber companies and the chemical companies and also Oregon Department of Forestry that draft was pulled, and then a very watered down version was put out. And those reports were to help communities assess what is happening in their watershed, source water protection. And it was really frustrating.
Yeah. So this goes back to a common theme big money in politics. The lumber companies can hire lobbyists to go down and roam up and down the halls of Salem and push their issues. And my question is, who represents the people? In theory, the legislators represent the people, but who gets their attention?
Well, and also, I am a retired state worker, and I felt retired for a while here, but I did feel like as a state government, it was their responsibility to also to represent the people. And I mean, who else is going to? And that is not what's happening in this current climate.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hey, Larry, I just wanted to say, ask Betsy if there was anybody in the audience that had any questions at this point, because I see a conversation going, and there's a lot of information. Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah, a lot of people are raising the issue about why people don't get that you can't pollute the water. But I think one of the big issues is actually exactly what Larry said about money and politics. I actually live in a timber county. It's not on the coast, but they are beholden to the timber industry, that's for sure. But somebody made a comment about they took out the watershed in the Appalachians for energy companies. It's the same thing everywhere.
All right. Thank you, Betsy. Something's going on with your audio. You log out and log back in?
So could you show slide 8?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is a picture of the protesters. The people in Rockaway Beach wanted to come and make their presence known to the Democratic Party. The resolution has been passed, and really what they were there for is to hear what had the Democratic Party done for them. The next slide, number 9, shows one of the protesters with their sign. At the very end of the meeting under new business, one of the delegates who was authorized to speak went up and asked the chair of the Democratic Party of Oregon what had been done in response to the resolution that had been passed in March. And the response she got was that all of the legislators had been written a letter and been notified that we had taken this position, but it just didn't feel overly believable because we had not been reported back to of anyone's response or interest in the legislature. And I'm sure there are legislators who would take up this cause if they cared, if they were informed about it. Was there any other questions on the line at this point?
Well, Betsy dropped out. She's coming right back in. Let's find out. Hey, Betsy, you're back. Awesome. Let's see how that audio is. We were talking about communication earlier, and one of the issues that it really hinders us in communication, Larry, is the fact that we haven't invested in a decent internet infrastructure for the citizens of the United States of America. It's pretty sad, 21st century. Betsy, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
There you go.
Is the audio better?
Yes, much better. So thank you for doing that. Are any other questions or anything you'd like to add about this?
Let me see. Well, the comment about 1 million years to make the environment by Robert and millions of dollars to make and destroy the environment. There are also particular comments about healthcare, and maybe if they had to pay for the healthcare cost because of their polluting, they might look differently. I mean, the government might look at it differently if they actually had to pay for of what is happening in the watershed.
Interesting idea. All right, thank you.
I would like to add briefly that on the cost of logging, when the heavy rains came in December 2015, there were multiple slides within a half mile above our treatment plant. And also then there's slides that coming down on the roads, the Highway 101, and it's the public that then pays for that, not the timber companies whose logging may have made those not encouraged, but caused those landslides to occur. Were a factor in those landslides. I mean, sure, there's some natural landslides, but not to the extent that we see down here.
Clear cutting is a whole different issue. Yeah. Thank you so much, Nancy, for joining us this morning. That was great information.
Thank you.
So why don't we switch to our next segment? So this will be the first discussion of several on how we can take back our rights as citizens. And so this is about the rule of law and parliamentary procedure. So, we just had a local example of why we need these rules. The United States is founded on the rule of law. That's why we have attorneys everywhere. We instead of pulling out the guns in most cases and shooting each other, we go to court and we arbitrate based on laws that have been passed. So in my city of Astoria, it was incorporated in 1876. That was the same year that Roberts published his first edition of Robert's Rules of Order. So for all intents and purposes, they did not have the ability to adopt Robert's Rules because it was something that was brand new, and it took a while for Robert's Rules to propagate itself across the country. Since that time, Astoria has had the opportunity to adopt them, but has refused. It's very singular and independent-minded. In 2000, one of the counselors, Tom Potter, said, we really need to adopt Robert's Rules of Order because without rules of order, I could do anything. And then he got up and started dancing to prove his point. So in this last, in the meeting,
I love that.
On Monday, they considered a resolution to oppose the development of some land up by Clatskanie for a fuel terminal or something. It's some unspecific but clearly corporate intended use, and they had a very well written resolution that they could vote on. It was brought up in city council meeting, and it turned out that one of the councilors had written his own resolution, and he kind of brought it up, and everyone said, "Oh, well, let's do that one." And then the mayor said, and I'm hearing this all secondhand from someone who was attending, the mayor said, "Oh, but I like this section of this other piece. Why don't we throw that in there?" And so they threw that into the original one, and they ended up with a much watered down resolution, not done in a thoughtful and methodical way in which all of the councilors were included, if they had been following Robert's Rules of Order. I think if you go to any city council of larger communities, like, and certainly for Portland, and I'm sure this goes on in places like Oregon City and in Salem, things are done according to procedure, so that all of the councilors have an equal voice, and it's not just the mayor weighing in and saying, "Oh, let's do this," because otherwise, why do we have the other councilors? So today, what we're going to focus on is the opening moves of a meeting. The reason why people hate Robert's Rules of Order is that people get, that leadership sometimes gets very, very knowledgeable of the rules, and they're able to abuse their authority in controlling and limiting debate and actually not giving the delegation or the assembly the rights that they deserve. So we're going to do this in three parts, and today's section is about the opening moves of a meeting. The next one is going to be about the presentation of ideas, and then the third one is when is the meeting over, because all of this is truly owned by the delegates. The role of the chair of a democratically run assembly is to carry out the will of the people, not to control the will of people and to dictate. So under opening moves, and this is slide number 18, there's the issue of credentialing, the credentials report, and in conventions, the selection of the chair and the approval of the agenda. So if you've ever been to a meeting, you will know that these are, well, first of all, if they're skipped, that is incorrect. And you need to demand that these steps are conducted. And if they are conducted, you need to pay attention, because this is where you can get screwed at the very beginning before the meeting even starts. So there's the concept of credentialing, and this is the determination of who has the right to participate in the meeting itself. The credentialing process needs to be defined, and the qualifications for who can belong to the meeting needs to be defined. In the last meeting we had of the State Central Committee in Tillamook, there was some issues about who could be seated. Like one county couldn't send a full delegation. The historical process had been for a substitute to be appointed by the chair. That concept was vetoed by the chair of the DPO this time because she didn't agree with it, and she felt that it wasn't supported by the bylaws. So a custom that had been inclusory in the past had been squelched. So the bottom line here is that you really need to watch how credentialing is conducted, and there needs to be a documented process so that everyone's credentials is clear and understood, and everyone agrees that who is voting in the meeting belongs there. In the meeting itself, one of the first things that happens is the giving of the credentials report. This is important for a couple of reasons. And this is your opportunity to object if something incorrect had happened. Most meetings have a quorum requirement, and those are stated in the bylaws. And so one of the purposes of the credentials report is to ensure that there's been enough people assembled to actually make decisions. One of the things that happens sometimes is that meetings are announced too late for everyone to attend, and so a subset of people start misrepresenting themselves as the will of the majority. So you got to make sure you have a quorum in order to conduct business. And this is also where you can object. So if you know someone who has been improperly credentialed going into the meeting, you can raise an objection here and follow the process of moving that someone be decredentialed. And some of these actions take guts to pull off. You have to stand up and say, I'm sorry, but so it's such and such has been credentialed. Such and such county is allocated 5 votes, and they have 6 people voting today. They need to be moved back to 5 votes, or whatever the issue is. And the reason why this is important is because you get situations where the votes are very close, like the situation where we lost by 2 votes. If 2 of our people had not been there, then we would have lost all 3 of the bylaws changes. So it's important to challenge the credentials report if you feel it's not correct, because once the credentials report has been accepted, then that's what you have to live with. In a convention, another sort of pro forma step that happens is the nomination of the chair. So the reason why this is often just treated as something that no one has to pay attention to is because the leadership has taken care of this and has made sure that everything is done equally and fair. But I'm sure you can envision circumstances where that is not the case. And so it is the right of the assembly, because the will of the majority is what prevails. It is their right to pick who is the chair of the convention. We have a nominating convention coming up on Monday to replace Representative Liniger. In that case, there is a standing rule, not a bylaws, but a standing rule that states how the chair is selected. Standing rules can be overturned by a vote of the majority. So you don't have to take these things as direct orders. If an inappropriate person has been appointed, you can challenge, and if a majority agrees with you, you can overturn it. Now, unfortunately, some of these things, like the nominating convention, is very, very complicated. And so if you object to someone, then you have to have a replacement in the wings willing to step up and conduct this job at the same level of competency. But it brings home the point that the assembly, the majority of the assembly, owns these decisions, like who runs the convention. The third area where there's a lot of abuse is the agenda. So just because the chair is chartered with writing up the agenda does not mean that is what has to be followed. The agenda belongs to the assembly. So after the credentials have been presented and it's been determined that there's enough people attending the meeting to have to make decisions, then we have the approval of the agenda. If you do not like the order in which the agenda is written, or if things have been left off the agenda, or if things need to be pulled off the agenda that are inappropriate, the will of the majority can reconfigure the agenda to what the majority prefers. And again, you do this with your basic motion. I move that agenda number 2, blah, 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 be removed from the agenda. Someone else has to second it. It's debated. And then if the majority of the delegates in attendance decide to pull that off, then that's what's happened. We've seen in the past county chairs think that they have the supreme right to conduct meetings in which way they feel, and that the agenda can't be changed, which is incorrect. Once you have reviewed the agenda and a majority has agreed, then you have the vote to accept the agenda, either as presented or as modified. Once everyone agrees to how you're going to be spending the next hour or two of your time, then it's a little bit more difficult to change the agenda later in the evening or in the meeting. So it's very important to pay attention to the agenda and what has been put on there, and to make sure that things have not been left off. One of the things that have been left off for years in the Democratic Party is the agenda item called new business. And this is where delegates can bring up new items. And this is their way of, if you look at the evil side of behavior of squelching the rights of the membership. But you do have the right to have new business on there which you can bring up.
Well, Larry, that's just a current corporate Dem ideological thing there, not to bring up new things.
I know, God forbid. The people are getting out of control.
Yeah, exactly. Progressives figure. So a question about all this stuff, because I've been in, 4 meetings so far with the Lynn County Democrats proper, and all this stuff really, I haven't heard anybody argue much. It generally, if you're running smooth, can go pretty quickly, right? It sounds like a
Yes.
lot, but usually it just flows through, right?
Yes, if you have ethical leadership and they're doing a responsible job, all this stuff goes through. It's only when you get the corner cases of,
right.
We're going to talk about this next week when we discuss the Democratic National Convention. We had a majority of delegates supporting Bernie Sanders from Oregon because Bernie won the primary by 56%.
Right.
And in ordinary circumstances, we would be asked, great, who do you want to be the chair delegation? Because you have the majority. There was an assumption that we would do what we'd always done in the past. And it was very awkward when the Sanders delegates demanded their rights. And it was startling to the leadership when because of the anger, and that was completely built up from the way Senator Sanders had been treated by the Democratic Party. And this was just another manifestation of that.
Of course. Well, because we're starting to use the rules of democracy again. It's really what you're talking about.
Yes, and everyone's afraid of democracy. It's just shocking that democracy is still something to be feared.
Right. Hey, Betsy, we have any questions in the chat?
I don't really see any questions in the chat, just someone indicating it's a good idea to talk about Robert's Rules of Order. I'm gonna make a couple of comments. One is, I've been a member of a political party that use consensus, and so it's actually because there is not that process of consensus that you need something more rigid to rely upon, like Robert's Rules of Order. Because it ultimately comes down to that democratic belief of a majority rules, right? Kind of concept. And part of the whole idea, I like to tell people that politics within the Democratic Party is kind of a microcosm of what our democracy is supposed to be about, which is due process, giving people notice of what to expect, giving people the opportunity to educate themselves before they're asked to consider a vote. And I've actually worked within a union and was an officer within the United Auto Workers Union, and they do rely upon Robert's Rules of Order, did back then. And it can be, unfortunately, a tool against activism if you don't know what they are. And the group that you're in, like the Democratic Party, uses Robert's Rules of Order. So it becomes, even at the more local level, although our local Central Committee operates under the Robert's Rules of Order, it is not really followed in this sense because there isn't controversy.
Yes, but they're always mentioned in your bylaws as being the backbone. So when things start to go south, you can bring out your Robert's Rules of Order and start demanding your rights back, because that's the only way. When you have leadership that is getting authoritarian, that is the only tool you have to take it back. And interestingly, Robert's Rules talks about consensus, and the reasons why he gives for why consensus is not so great are right on, and I've seen that happen. In theory, consensus sounds great. In reality, we often see chairs using this as a way of controlling, because who wants to be the lone opposition to something? Because in consensus, everyone has to agree, and so that puts you on the spot if you don't agree with what's being agreed upon.
Thanks, Larry. Thank you, Betsy. You got about 5 minutes left, Larry.
Okay, so if we go to slide 22, if you're interested in Robert's Rules of Order, there's 2 books that you can get, and there is not an iPad version yet, so don't wait for that one too long. There's the official version, which is with the brown cover, and this is what people pull up and quote. This is what people refer to by page and line number. On the right is Robert's Rules of Order in brief, which covers 80% of the things that you would ever encounter in a meeting, and is a great starter place. The full Robert's Rules is kind of hard to read because it's in by topic, but there's a lot of cross-referencing throughout the whole book, and it's almost 1,000 pages long. But you can easily read Robert's Rules of Order in a day in brief version, and get the gist of what's going on. You can join the Oregon Association of Parliamentarians if you're in Oregon, and I have the URL there. It's OregonAPNAP.org, and they meet monthly, and it's a really great way to get together and discuss these issues, because there's lots of nuances to how these rules are implemented. And then we have the National Association of Parliamentarians, which is having a convention at the beginning of September that I'm attending. So 2 great sources if you want to learn more about this and join up with people also interested in the topic.
Great.
So going to slide 23, the big event this coming week, of course, is the nomination convention. And that's where you see all of these processes that I've been talking about come into real life action. If you like live theater, there's going to a play and seeing something scripted, but the much more dramatic is going to a meeting such as this, where real decisions are being made, and people are speaking and defending their beliefs, and voting is occurring, and people are going to lose and people are going to win. It's going to be high drama. So at 7 p.m. on Monday at the Multnomah Arts Center at 7688 Southwest Capitol Highway, you will see an actual nomination convention be conducted. The delegates are going to be the precinct committee people that reside in Clackamas County and Multnomah County, and in House District 38, which is the district that Ann Lininger is residing.
Wait a minute. So you're saying that the lowly PCP will actually get a vote of power on who they nominate to replace this person?
Yes, and it's one of the most exciting things that PCPs get to do.
Yeah.
I've attended a half a dozen of these, and it's just fascinating. It's fascinating to watch.
That's badass. Now I'm excited to be a PCP. Wait, I get rid of somebody in my neighborhood. That's awesome. Thank you for all this information, Larry. This has been fantastic.
And finally, the upcoming shows that we have planned for next Sunday. I hope to have people who attended the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia last year, both as non-delegates and who were in the street demonstrations, and as delegates who were inside the convention hall and were subjected to some of the tricks that the establishment pulled, like turning off lights when signs were being held up, and draping flags over protesters because they didn't want us going off script. So that show will be where we talk about what really happened at the Democratic National Convention that you did not see on TV. And then on September 3rd, we're going to devote the show to homelessness in Oregon and talk about the piece of legislation that was blocked in the Oregon Senate that would have been so helpful to the people that are being thrown out of their rentals for no cause whatsoever.
Awesome. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Betsy. Laura Live, good for lurking. Anything else, Larry? Are we out of here?
I am done. If there's no questions from the world, we finished our show today.
Yeah, we got to figure out Betsy's audio there, but I think we're good. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next Sunday, right, Larry? We're doing this again, right? Next
Yes.
Sunday. All right. Let's go out with that tune your friend made. It's nice.
Listen up, fellow Democrats. Fight fake news and lies with facts. Save our democracy from right-wing hypocrisy. Keep our integrity, embrace our diversity. Whenever we're down, we always come back. So listen up, Democrats.